Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Parent, and I am the CEO of Court Square Group, and this is the Driving the Business of Science podcast. Why do we do this podcast? I started this podcast a while back because as a company, we are a managed service firm. We manage infrastructure for life science companies, and over the course of time, we manage applications all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. We've met a lot of people over the years that have some very interesting roles within the space, and I just thought I don't know that everybody knows that that happens. And I said, it would be great for me just to start talking to different people that I meet over time and bring that out to them. So I thought it was great. So again, we have a managed service called ARC, Audit Ready Compliant Cloud. We host and manage infrastructure, as well as we have a system called RegDocs 365, which is a content repository that hosts any type of clinical and regulatory content. Um, in my dealings, we're going to have a great person on today. His name is Matt Kiernan. He's the CEO and founder of Sensorium Clinical Research. And I'm going to let Matt introduce himself, and then we'll talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about our how we got together, and then some topics that he's of interest in, and then we're going to get into site networks in general. And I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So, with that being said, I'd like to introduce Matt Kiernan. Matt, great to have you on the podcast today.
Hey Keith, great to see you. I appreciate you inviting me here to talk to you. I've been a big fan of your podcasts for a while, and just you as a person in general. And it's always good to catch up with great people.
Absolutely fantastic. So, give us a little bit of your background, Matt. Tell me a little bit about what you're all about.
Sure. I started my career in the pharmaceutical industry. I actually started in the lab, and someone said to me at one point, I think this is a offhanded compliment to say I should get out of the lab. They said, "Oh, you seem like a really good business person." So I kind of thought about that, and I was always interested in getting into the business side of the pharmaceutical industry. And so early in my career, I worked for a small CRO called Iva, which was just a fantastic place. They had great culture there, and I ended up working at it, eventually going to a consulting company called Barnett International. This is the first time I really learned about the importance of culture. They hired fantastic people. The consultants were down to earth. They were just always there to serve the clients, and the dynamic between the consultants was fantastic. I still keep in touch with a lot of those people. Shout out to the Barnett people out there in the world. Um, yeah, it was just a lot of fun. I was there for 5, 6 years, and that's when I truly learned about culture and how important it is to business. And and after that, I worked at a couple other large CROs, Bristol Myers Squibb, and I got to a point where I said, you know what, I gotta jump out and start my own business. And at that point, I felt like I was ready for it. And so what I did is I started my first companies around 2005 called Pharmaca Consulting. My goal with my colleague Eric Lake, we just wanted to create an environment that was a great place to work. We've all been at jobs where it was a toxic environment or negative, and it might have been the company, it might have been your boss, and that impacts you at home with your family, your friends, your overall health. And life's just too short. I enjoy working incredibly hard and doing great things, but I want to have fun while I'm doing it. So Pharmaca, we were all about just having a good time and creating something special for our clients. And we went on a good run there. I started another company around 2012 or so called Intrinsic Clinical Systems. That was software for clinical trials, and same approach, with culture. That was the most important thing for me. That's why I always get up out of bed if I can, create jobs and environment for people to truly have fun. Like that's special. I think that really, any entrepreneur, that's what you should be doing in my mind. And so I sold those companies, Pharmac and Intrinsic, in 2021 to Pro Pharma Group and helped them for a couple of years. And then around 2024, I left Pro Pharma Group, and all of a sudden, I got bored. I was really bored. The whole thing of retiring for some people is great. My colleague Eric, he picked up a guitar and joined a band, and that's not me. I like having something to stimulate my brain. I'm kind of nerdy with business, and so that's what kind of brought me up to the current place here where I am now, Sensorium.
Well, that's fantastic. And that kind of leads us into the first half of what we're going to talk about today. People every once in a while you wonder in business, you say, how do these guys get together? How do they meet? And as an owner of the company, every once in a while I get somebody that reaches out to me and just said, "Hey, I've done this. I'd like to talk with you about it," things like that. And Matt had reached out to me through an email, and I liked his message. And I said, "You know what? Let me give this guy a jingle." And when we started talking, and I just love the initial conversations Matt and I had. And as an owner of a company, sometimes it's a very lonely place to be. You
It
can only
is.
talk to your employees and stuff like that, but when you talk to somebody else who had a business and ran a business and sold a business, it's great to get that knowledge from somebody. So having Matt reach out to me and talk to me about a few things, we talked about a number of things that I was going through. So I just really enjoyed the conversations, and Matt was fantastic talking to me about that. And we had three or four every couple of months we would catch back up and talk about different things. And he made some great introductions for me to a couple of different people. So I was really happy about that. So Matt, how did you just think about reaching out? And I know you want to talk about how you start a business, and you were reaching out because you were looking at new businesses to start, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, so what I did was after I left Pro Farmer Group, I sat down, I started just thinking about what I'm going to do. And it's not easy transition. Like, do I get a job and just work for somebody? Do I start another company? Do I really want to do that? And as I progressed, I said, you know what? I think I want to start another company, but it's the age-old question, what company do I start? A lot of people always ask me that question. And what was really unique for me, it was a really fun time period, was I didn't have a job, so I had all day to think. And I not only that, I had a lot of experiences that I could pull upon versus, say, when I first started my first company 20 years ago, I knew some things, but didn't know a lot necessarily. I maybe had more energy back then, but so I took a pretty systematic approach about starting Sensorium, and it kind of went back to just looking at all the different pieces of the pharma value chain. And I started looking at like medical affairs, commercial, sales, quality space, drug development. And as I was going through that, I learned a lot about private equity over the last 10 years in selling and acquiring companies. And there's a couple things I was looking at when I was looking at each of the pieces of the pharma value chain was one, is there a problem that needs to be solved? Right? Obvious question, but truly, what is it? Two, if you're going to be buying companies and doing a roll up, what private equity often does, you need fragmentation, meaning you need a lot of small companies that you can acquire. And what a lot of people, I don't think, don't realize to the extent that private equity is all around you in this world. I mean, you go drive the car, dry cleaning, it's private equity owned. You want to get your car cleaned, private equity owned. It's not just professional services like Court Square Group or Pharmaca Consulting. It's everywhere. And so what these private equity roll-ups, what they do is they look for fragmentation with a lot of small companies to buy them and make them bigger, something that's more rare that becomes more valuable. So I looked at commercials, sales, all these places. I made a list of companies to potentially acquire, a target list. I couldn't make the list was small. I would, go through LinkedIn. I tried to use AI. I network with colleagues and brokers, and that concerned me that there wasn't a lot of companies to acquire. And I was searching for what is that problem I'm going to solve. And then eventually I wound up in the site space early last year. And right away, I said to myself, I'm an idiot. I should have came here right away. Like I kind of knew that already, but it wasn't just didn't become obvious. And I've been around clinical trials my whole life. I've never worked at a site, but I knew a lot of challenges they'd have, and they were still there. And the challenge is these site owners, they're small businesses. A million revenue, 3 million revenue, 5 million revenue. Most of the sites are not that big where all the fragmentation resides. And what you have is you have site owners that they have to do 10 jobs in a day. They're pulling off miracles. Like, no joke. Like, they're doing HR, they're doing finance, they're doing business development. And oh, by the way, they got to treat patients.
And
So
you
it's had
imagine how
like,
that feels, right? Doing 10 jobs in
uh,
3 days.
it's the most important part. So so the question becomes for these sites, they have to hire people to help them. But the problem, and this is for every business owner out there, it's so important to understand. You can see I got an MBA from finance in Villanova back here, but they don't teach a lot of these things when you're in school. And one of the most important things to understand as an entrepreneur is your fixed costs. Once you start scaling above your fixed costs, all the other revenue is so much more profitable. It almost all goes to the bottom line. And so what these sites are facing is they can't scale above these fixed costs because they have to spend a lot that's overhead. Hire a business development person, hire an HR person. So they're kind of in this mode of, do I take on more risk by hiring more people? And that's the challenge they have. So I wanted to try to solve that problem. And some of these problems are already trying to be solved going back about 5 years ago when private equity flowed into the site network space. And so now it's getting to a point where these sites that do fantastic job with caring for their patients in the clinical trials. They have the connection to the community, the local culture, they understand it, but they need help from these site networks. And so what typically happens when you have a lot of fragmentation is money flows in like private equity, acquisitions occur, and consolidation does not stop. Look at the IRB industry. There's two IRBs now. 25 years ago, there's a bunch of them. The CRO industry, there's 5, 10 large CROs. When I started my career, there's a lot of small CROs. So it's inevitable. So what happens is a lot of these small businesses, they got a choice. They can either join a bigger company, CRO and IRB, a site network, or they can try to create a niche for themselves. Say, we're only going to focus on rare disease, for example. And it becomes challenging to try to do that. And a lot of these site owners are just really burned out from just trying to pull off miracles every day. So when I was looking at this space, I said, I see the problem. These sites owners need help. I see that the consolidation's happening and that the consolidation is solving some other problems where it's the startup for a site can be shrunk with a site network. If you have, say, 20 sites and a large pharma company comes to you and says, hey, I need, 5 sites for a CNS trial, instead of having 5 different CTAs and budgets, you can have one. So now you speed it up a lot more. For every day, clinical trials delayed, sponsors lose about $1 million potential revenue. So every day is so valuable. The other thing site networks can solve is consistency in enrollment. 1/3 of sites don't enroll a patient or enroll one patient. So 1/3 of them are severely underperforming. That's a real big challenge. So if you have a site network where you can have centralized patient recruitment and you can have a true capability of patient recruitment, you have a much better shot at enrolling patients. And then the other thing that is a third point that site networks are solving in general is how do we get more consistent enrollment? You said you're going to enroll 10 patients. You need to enroll 10, or we need to go find more sites. So the site network space, they're solving some really big problems for sponsors. It's just a matter of these sites. What do they do? Do they join these sponsors? And these site networks, and when I was talking to a lot of colleagues, it was a really cool time period, Keith, because I was just going to conferences, talking to site network sponsors, and I don't know how many people I talked to last year about the concept of a site network. And the big concern I heard from a lot of people is they're starting to become a little too corporate, just like the CRO industry, just like the IRB industry. That like the secret sauce of Court Square Group is, probably your small business that services just awesome.
Yeah.
When you get bigger, it's tough. It's hard to like keep that customer service and what makes you special. And so for me, I looked at this and I thought to myself, you know what? I know how I can create a site network and solve all those problems around patient enrollment and startup, but you still got to be different. If you're a business, how are you going to differentiate from your competition? And for me, it's all about culture. Like that's why I get out of bed in the morning to run a business. I enjoy being around people and creating something special and working hard. And it gets back to my days at, I talked about before, Barnett International and IVA when there's fantastic culture there. So what I want to do at Sensorium, I want to acquire companies, these sites that are been run for 20 years, that are, owners are fantastic people that know their culture, their local culture. And I think what makes clinical research so special is when you have these site owners that are fantastic people that know their community, you don't want to lose that. You don't want to standardize that away
Right.
from all these acquisitions. It's got to remain there. And so we're doing Sensorium. We're embracing that local culture. What makes those sites special cannot be lost in this industry. 20 years from now, if I'm in a wheelchair or, I'm retired and I come back to Sensorium, that purpose should still be there. That these sites maintain what makes them special and diversity in their culture.
Well, now everybody knows why I look for certain people that I want to have on the podcast. That's fantastic. One of those things um, that when I talk to people that I want to have on the podcast, I really want them to just tell their story and what it's all about and things like that. When I met Matt and we were talking about different things up front, he was in the search for the things, and we were talking about site network and talking about some of the different things out there. So when it didn't surprise me when all of a sudden he said, "Oh, I started a site network. I bought it into a site network, and we're going to do this." A couple things that I've noticed, because I deal with sponsors, CROs, CDMOs, we never have been big at the site level and doing stuff with the sites. But one thing I can tell you is that from my perspective, every single clinical operations show that I go to, and I go to a lot, particularly around clinical trials, the Evolution Summit that I do with Marcus Evans is a huge one. Precision clinical trials strategic summit, all these kind of things. One of the things that we always talk about is the interaction between the CROs and the sites, or the sponsors and the sites, and how they do. They talk about technology fatigue because every one of the sponsors wants to use a different technology, or every CRO comes in with a different technology. But the biggest thing that we don't talk about a lot is the fact that what you're talking about, the fact that these sites are small businesses that are really trying to work
Yep.
themselves out, and they're trying to do stuff. A lot of times, the bigger the CRO or the bigger the trial, they go to these same sites over and over again because they know they're going to get a certain number of whether it's Cleveland Clinic or it's going to be some of the big sites, and that's why they get a lot of white males, because it's easy to pull people out of those things. They don't go to a lot of the inner city sites. They don't go to a lot of the sites that are on the fringe and things like that. Maybe those sites are naive to clinical trials, and I think bringing some culture to those companies that are out there, and maybe another revenue stream that they may not have thought about, is a huge benefit. I will say that in a this year, two things I saw. One was um, when I went to one of the panels that I chaired. We had a site network that was part of the panel, and one of the things we were talking about was the fact that some networks are actually taking on some of the functions that a CRO would do, and they're
Yeah.
trying to do some of that. So is that impinging on what the CRO is doing? And would the sponsors want to work with that site network outside of working with the CRO? Because we have a lot of customers on our end that don't use CROs at all, and they do their own trials. Maybe it's phase 1, phase 2 trials. They don't want to go through the CROs. They want to do their own and kind of do it. They've done it before. They've learned enough that they're going to do their own, phase 1, 2 trials. And maybe they'll just wait to get a CRO for the big ones. That was one thing that we saw. The other thing that I saw was at the Marcus Evans Summit that we go to. It's always been sponsor heavy and CRO heavy. This year, at the last one we went to was down in Fort Lauderdale. There were two different site networks that were represented there, and
Yep.
I was
Yep.
very curious about that. And we had some great conversations, and to your point around culture and things like that, that is a big part of it, because typically the founder, he ran a clinic, he wanted to do something, he started something up, he found another clinic that he was working with, and I think that is a huge opportunity. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about different areas. And if you think about it, you do have the concept of therapeutic areas. You do have the concept of geographic areas. There's whole different reasons why a site network may spring up somewhere. But I think
Yep.
that I'm seeing that. Are you seeing any of those kind of things when you were doing your research on site networks and how they're working?
Yeah, it's often asked like what therapeutic area you're looking to acquire sites, or what region, things like that. And I was even talking to some capital providers last year that were asking me if I wanted to go into Africa, for example. So it's sort of this, people are thinking about it globally, but just within the US. I mean, for me, I was at the Global Site Summit last year, and I was asked so many times, what kind of sites are you looking for? And people were asking in a more sophisticated way around types of trials or sites and all these other things. And for me, at the end of the day, what I said to everybody is, give me great people and great businesses. I think there's so many times people overcomplicate stuff with business. At the end of the day, if you have great people, you avoid problems, you avoid drama, or if a problem comes up, you work together as a team and you solve it. So for me, like, that's what's near and dear to my heart. You know, at the end of the day, when I'm looking to acquire a site, if I can look somebody in the eye and say, I really want to spend a lot of time with this person. They're so much fun to be with, or create something special. That's what matters to me. Then I'm interested. Otherwise, I'm not interested. But and to answer some of your other questions, like just the overall proliferation of interest around sites has been phenomenal in the last 3 to 5 years. Back in the day, I helped Merck like 25 years ago in a consulting engagement, helping them to figure out how they could be a better partner with their sites. And it was a lot of the same things, challenges that are right now, but the difference now is that there's some capital flowing into the space. As a result of that, sites are starting to go to conferences. Sites are starting to think about AI. Sites are starting to do a variety of things where now more and more vendors are popping up in this space. There's a lot of new vendors in this space. There's no big one really yet. And I'm waiting for somebody to come along to say, become the next metadata in this space. But nobody's really come out with, hey, I'm taking 25 million and I'm just going after it. Because I think, tying back to your other point around the CRO industry, I think there's going to be convergence of the site networks and the CROs over time. When you think about, CROs will write the CSR, the budget, or the clinical trial. They'll write the CSR, and AI can do that right now. Stats, you can kind of automate that with AI. It's a lot of software. A lot of the stuff around the data, I'm just working my way backwards from the end of the trial to the front. A lot of stuff in data management can be automated. So it's the front half of a trial, the site startup, patient enrollment. That takes up a good 30-40% of a CRO budget. And so then if you think about it from a site perspective, well, the CRAs take about 30-40% of that budget. If I can cut down on my CRA costs because you use monitors within my network to ensure quality, or you hire an outside CRA as an independent sort of auditor, I think you can cut down a lot of the overhead. The project management's 10 to 20% of a CRO budget. So you start to get to a point, if you can automate the back half, you can streamline the front half of a site. Now, well, can't they just run the full trial?
Yeah.
So I did a lot of analysis when I had a lot of my free time last year. I remember at one point it was, I get on this binge where I just get uh, locked in with thoughts, and I spent like 3 days just thinking about what a AI enabled site network, CRO site network could look like. To the point where I grabbed the domain and reserved it.
Oh,
I think
interesting.
you could
I
cut
can see the
down
light bulbs going off above your head already as you're
right.
talking about this stuff. So I see where you're going already. That's pretty cool. I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. And now, when you were looking at your sites and you created Sensorium Site Network or clinical Sensorium Clinical Research, did you find sites that were already involved in clinical research, or did you find just sites because of the culture that you wanted and just kind of pulled them together and then taught them some of the clinical research aspects of what you're trying to go after?
Now, the sites we acquired to date have been in business for over 20 years.
Okay.
So they know their business, they know the community, they have a connection with the community that few sites have out there. It's A couple of our sites have done well over 100 CNS trials each, which is a lot. Um, so for me, when I was talking to these sites, I met one of the PIs at the Global Site Summit last year, and you talk to the people, and right away it's like you walk away and say, these are fantastic people. These are the kind of people I'm going to spend my time with. It's pretty quick for me, at least. I don't know for other people, where they're a great person who are dedicated to their craft. And they're not just like somebody who's kind of like corporate and they don't have a personality and care about their work. They truly care about their craft. That's what you see, and that's when
Yeah, right.
it's probably the right business to buy. You just got to look at their financials and see where margins are, and if they're not that good, could you improve them? But that's pretty much it for me.
That's awesome. Hey, listen, we're coming up on time, and I want to just kind of get some of your last thoughts on what you think about where Sensorium's going, where the market's going. I think we got a little bit of that, but let's kind of wrap it up with some of your final thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, overall, like I said before, the consolidation in the site industry, it's not going to stop. There are plenty of examples outside the pharmaceutical industry, inside the pharmaceutical industry, where that progression keeps occurring. So, I think if you go back to sort of that Wayne Gretzky analogy, you got to skate to where the puck's going. That's how you need to think about this stuff. And then you overlay it with some AI things. There's AI being used in budgets now. There's AI being used for enrollment. Like it's coming really, really quick. And I think the sites that are finding the right people to work with and creating those benefits in that centralized site group around patient enrollment, speed, business development. I think the site networks that do that really well are going to be the winners. And I think the ones that understand and remember what clinical research is all about are going to be the winners as well. And I think that's the most important part because people who work in this industry, they don't want to feel like they're at some corporate job. They care about their patients. You cannot remove that from them. You
Yeah.
cannot remove what makes it special to their community. That's clinical research. So
Well, and I
that's
think,
where,
and I think, Matt, I think that the issue is really around getting the message out to people that for clinical sites that are actually actively looking at new research and new things going on out there and bringing that to their patients. How many patients are suffering with things that if they just talk to their doctors about that or talk to their sites about,
yeah,
they might be able to understand that there's things that they can do today for some of that. So I think that you're it's a huge service. So I applaud you wholeheartedly for everything you're doing there. I'd love to say, look at you in the future and look at the future podcast. Once you put your AI strategy in place and you start moving things around, I'm already working with sponsors on how they can get faster study startup time and some of the kind of stuff that's there from their aspect. I'm
yeah,
working with CROs on how can they do submissions faster. And there's a lot of places that we've added so much manual effort in the interaction between a
yeah,
CRO and a site and sites and sponsors and things like that. That if we can clean up some of that stuff and stop worrying about, we're always worrying about monitoring everybody because somebody's screwing up somewhere. So
yeah,
if we let the machines monitor us more and just kind of let the stuff work the right way, we'd have to worry less about it. Just trust it. That's where we're going to get it going and let the AI kind of work with us to kind of pull some of that together. I think it'd be fantastic. So I look forward to staying up with you and keeping up with you where you're going. Just so people know, I've already introduced Matt to a couple of companies myself. He was such a gracious host to introduce me to a number of people that I'm returning the favor with him. And I think that as we small businesses continue to stay out here and grow, part of that is networking and getting people to know who's out there and who's doing what. So I look forward to your journey. And this has been the Driving the Business of Science broadcast, our podcast, and love to follow up with you, Matt, in the future.
yeah. Sounds great. Always good to see you, Keith.
Thanks, Matt. Everybody, take care. Great to see you again. Bye bye.
Bye bye.